Welcome to another episode of Unscripted, and I have the great pleasure to introduce Martin Bialczak. Thank you very much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing good, David. Thank you for having me.
While we're setting this up, I could tell you are a pro. You don't leave anything to chances. You are, I like to say the devil's in the details. You made sure you have enough space on your machine. It's plugged in and so on, which is in cybersecurity. I think one of the areas that we have to be cognizant of is the attention to details. So why don't we kind of walk me through just to get started and warm up, because this is going to be completely unscripted. Let's walk through kind of the inception, how you got started in cybersecurity.
Yeah, sure. It's actually an interesting story. I kind of knew early on that I wanted to get into cybersecurity, but didn't really know how. So when I was in college, I was majoring in management information systems, taking a lot of computer classes and stuff like that, and was looking for that first job. And I started applying to just various companies using monster.com, which I don't know if that's still around or not, but I ended up applying to this one company for actually a sales position out of all things. And the recruiter called me back and said, "Hey, you applied for this position. We want you to come in for an interview." And honestly, I applied to so many companies at that point. I wasn't even sure which company it was. So I came in for an interview for the sales position at a company called Integralis in East Hartford, Connecticut. And they were basically standing up some junior sales roles for this cybersecurity company. And I did pretty good at that interview. And the guy that was interviewing me said, "Well, you seem pretty technical. Would you be interested in applying for this other engineering position that we have on the other side of the house? It's a professional services engineer position, and I think you'd be interested in that position as well." So I ended up interviewing for that position on the same day, and I had a choice which way to go. Do I want to go sales or do I want to go engineering? And my heart was in the engineering side, so I decided to go that way, and that's kind of how I got started. I worked as a junior professional services engineer at Integralis for was it like 2 or 3 years. Got a lot of experience in kind of hands-on configuring firewalls and setting up all kinds of network security devices, and really getting a lot of hands-on experience that I didn't get at school, and got my start there. Then I had an opportunity that came up at a company called Cigna, healthcare company out of Connecticut, that had a leadership development program. And so I applied for the leadership development program. I had a couple of friends that were part of that program, so they helped get me in there. And the thing I liked about that program is it let me rotate around the company and try different things. So going in, I knew I wanted to get into cybersecurity, and that's what I told the manager there, is I eventually want to work in cybersecurity. But they kind of told me, "Hey, we'll get you there, but why don't you try a couple different things while you're here?" So I ended up getting into the application development team, doing release management. I worked on the network team for a year, and then finally got into cybersecurity, working in the SOC over at Cigna. And I think having that experience of trying different things and getting to learn the business was very helpful early on in my career.
It's such a cool story, and I can totally relate. I can tell you that my first job after college was also through Monster, so I can tell you that. And it was also to a new startup VAR that was just starting out back in the day in Toronto. But it's really remarkable. What do you think that specifically they liked about you and saw kind of the technical aspect, like in your first interview that you had, since it was kind of a sales role, but then I'm assuming something that you said or the way you conveyed yourself alluded to you being more technical. Do you remember what it was?
I think it was a couple different things, but I think maybe one of them was that I was willing to do pretty much anything to get started. Nothing was beneath me. And I had a lot of jobs before then that were not technical. They were not in my field. I mean, I've done everything from I was a truck driver at one point, and I worked in a gas station, and I've done all kinds of other jobs, throughout college to pay for school. I joined the military. I was in the Army for a little while. But, at the interview, I kind of made it clear that I was willing to do anything to kind of get my foot in the door. And so that junior professional services engineer position required a lot of things that not everyone was willing to do. So part of it was traveling. And as a young person back then, not having a wife and kids and all that, I had a little bit more flexibility. So I was able to travel a little bit more. I supported all the appellate courthouses in Pennsylvania. Anytime they had issues with their firewalls and needed to have a firewall switched out, I would drive out there, I would pack a firewall into my trunk and drive out and do the swap out. So being able to do that, but it also gave me an opportunity to learn a lot. I was responsible for the lab at Integralis. We had a lab that we would use to mock up customer environments and test out different products. And so I used that opportunity to learn as much as I could. Everything from configuring switches and routers to deploying, agents and setting up domains and all the kind of stuff that, again, I really didn't really have hands-on experience at school. I did a lot of book work at school, but at least when I was going to school, a lot of the hands-on stuff was missing. So that first role was very instrumental in me learning a lot of that hands-on stuff that kind of carried over into my other positions later on.
And Martin, if I can double click on it, it's essentially the fact that you exhibited a can-do attitude, meaning that you were right there and then you seemed like a person who can take ownership over a role that wasn't easy and just do whatever it takes, whatever the company needed. And I believe today, if you look at a lot of job seekers out there today, especially ones that are just coming out of school with not a lot of experience, I think a lot of them have this misconception or almost like sense of entitlement. They want to get like a good role somewhere, and I always preach, hey, just get any role. Get in any role, especially in a smaller company where you can get your feet wet. Get dirty into all kinds of different roles, like different tasks, and just do whatever it takes. And then the opportunities will present itself. And I think that is sometimes more important than your formal education, your certification, your boot camp that you've done. I think the attitude carries a long way. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a give and take relationship, right? So in a lot of these junior positions, the employer is hiring you to take on a job, but at the same time, part of your pay is the experience that you're gaining. I had a lot of junior people working for me throughout my career, and it does take some time and effort to help train them and kind of guide them along the way, and that's part of their pay. They might not be making as much money monetarily. Their salary may not be very high early on, but the knowledge and the skills that you gain and the experience and the connections that you make early on more than makes up for what would be perceived as a lower salary early on in your career. So you got to look at it that way, is you are providing something for your employer and you have to give 110%, especially early on in your career. And at the same time, you're gaining a lot. You're gaining those connections. And the better job that you do early on, the more connections you have and the more people can recognize your skills, because later on, you'll have those connections that will help pull you up the ladder. They'll look at you and they'll say, hey, David, I remember when you were kind of early on in your career, you did a really good job. You never complained. You worked hard. You continued to develop yourself. And hey, I happen to have this position on my team now. Would you like to come interview? That's happened a lot in my career, and I've afforded that opportunity to people that I know in my past as well, people that I know are dependable and that work hard and that will get the job done.
Absolutely. And I would also mention the fact that you had experience doing other jobs that weren't easy. It's not easy to be a truck driver. It's not easy to work at a gas station. That will give you some perspective. It's almost like I've heard an interview with Schwarzenegger, and he was saying like how he was always smiling at the gym, even though he had to lift like heavy weights. And he goes, well, what's the alternative? I have my classmates in high school, they're working the mines. So anything beats that. If you look at what the alternatives are, you sit in front of a computer, maybe, yeah, you have to work long hours, maybe, yeah, you have to travel, but your prospects of success and in becoming something of yourself are greater than just being, doing some manual labor somewhere. And so everything beats that. So the fact that you had that experience doing something else and allows you to have some perspective in terms of what needs to be done in order for you to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you learn a lot from those earlier jobs, even if they seem menial. You learn things like customer service, how to deal with customers, how to deal with your colleagues, conflict resolution, and all kinds of other stuff that, like I said, carries on later on. How to manage your time, how to manage projects, all that stuff you learn throughout your work career, even if you don't think it applies then and there. A lot of that carries on into later jobs that you have, and additionally, I think it makes you a little bit more humble later on in your career. Once you become a manager, or a director, or vice president, even a business owner yourself, you look back and you look at the people that work for you at some of those lower positions, and you remember when you were kind of lower on the totem pole, and you have a little bit more respect for those folks. So I think having that experience early on really helps throughout your career.
Yeah, I'm nodding vigorously because I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm in the whole agreement we just mentioned. It's so important, and it seems like, again, I think if you look at today, a lot of younger folks, it's almost like beneath them. They don't want to do some of these jobs. They want to just go in, wear a nice set of clothes, and just go on a computer. And I think that's part of the problem. Is also, if you look at the bulletin boards of some of these IT training, it always shows somebody who's soon as out of after college or after the boot camp is wearing this nice shirt and is like on a laptop, coding away somewhere. And it's not necessarily, I mean, yeah, it might be the case, but it's also better to have the other perspective of being a little dirty, doing some work that is manual and potentially has some physical difficulties, or have a lot of moving parts, like you mentioned, dealing with people and so on. And if you look back in your career path, you mentioned there was one point where you kind of convert into cybersecurity, and I feel that there's always a fork in the road that you pick that really propel you to kind of the next level. Can you pinpoint in your career path, like in terms of trajectory, what really made it for you?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of forks in the road if I look back, and I think a lot of people have these opportunities, that are presented to them, and it's on them to kind of either capitalize on that opportunity or pass it by. And throughout my career, I've always tried to capitalize on every opportunity that I've been given.
But
So
Martin, sometimes you don't know. Not to, and I apologize to cut you off, but sometimes when an opportunity presents itself, it's not totally clear that it's an opportunity.
mhm.
And I think that's what people are missing. A lot of times it might be disguised itself as something else. Even some people get laid off or something happened, they have to change careers. And at a time, it seems like a miserable, and then all of a sudden it can convert into an opportunity that they didn't see before. Would you agree?
Right, I agree. And sometimes those opportunities might not be comfortable right off the bat. So, for example, when I was working at Cigna, I was in this leadership development program. I finished the program and I posted out into basically a full-time role, even though I was working full-time, but let's call it a full-time employee role. And I was doing good. I was a great employee. I was well liked by my peers. And I had room for growth within Cigna, but another opportunity came up at a company called Boston Scientific that was very early on in their security program. They didn't have much of a security program at that time. And so I had an opportunity I had kind of a fork in the road, like you mentioned. I can either stay at Cigna and be comfortable, and maybe I'll still be working there today, or I can go down this uncomfortable road and start something different, something new and different, which is build out a security program from the ground up. Not everyone's down for that. It is risky, right? You're going into an environment you're not familiar with. There's a lot of work ahead of you, but it is an opportunity because it gives you a different path to go down and a potential for growing your career much faster than the path that you're currently on. And so that's the path I chose. I ended up going to Boston Scientific, working there for 5 years and building out their security program and learning a lot more than if I had stayed at Cigna. That's one of the things that I always look at when I'm entertaining new opportunities is, does it take me outside of my comfort zone? And will it potentially provide me with more of a runway in the long term?
When you evaluate that, again, it's not necessarily clear always. It's sometimes you have to unwrap what is the offer and where it can lead you. What tools do you use to look at any opportunity that comes on your falls in your lap, or you are in pursuit of something? How would you know in kind of evaluating the pros and cons? Because I think a lot of people are struggling with that. I think why a lot of people potentially stay where they are is they don't want to take the risk, but also maybe they aren't clear in terms of where the opportunity can go in terms of position and where potentially can lead to.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, ultimately, it is pretty risky because obviously the recruiter is going to try to pitch the new opportunity in the best light to make sure that that you take the position, even if there are things about the role that may not be all that great. And it is a risk at the end of the day. Right.
And sometimes the devil is a no, right? The devil, like you much rather stay. I mean, there's pros and cons, but at least you know what the cons are. And then when you go into a new, unknown territory, you have no idea how things. And that was very risky because you jump into a company that did not have a security program, and I'm assuming there was a lot of on-the-job training, OJT, because at the time probably is not a lot of people had to build something like that. There were a lot of unknowns, and the fact that you took ownership over that was significant. That was very high risk, high reward type of position.
Right. Yeah, it was, but that's something that I enjoy doing. I enjoy going into a company, using my previous experience and building things up from the ground up. That's just kind of my personality. But going back to your original question of kind of how do I evaluate opportunities and make sure that they're right for me. So the other thing that I depend on is my mentors. I've been lucky to have mentors along the way, both formal and informal, that I can reach out to and bounce ideas off of. And I think that's very important for everyone to have those people in your life, both personally and professionally, to be able to bounce ideas off of. And so a lot of times before I accepted an opportunity, while I'm evaluating it, I would approach people in my life that I trust, and especially folks that are in cybersecurity that have been down this road before, and see what they have to think, to say about it. And that's been helpful. And I do the same thing. I have people that are kind of my proteges now that are early on in their career, and I try to mentor them the best I can and show them some of the pitfalls that I came across so that they don't make the same mistakes.
Let's unravel some of the things you mentioned now. So how do you get a mentor? I think there's a lot of misconception about what the mentor's role are, and how do you maintain those relationships? I'm assuming today as mentors, it's peers. There's a whole network of either professional and personal, where you rely on not just for decision making, as you mentioned, for new opportunities, but just in general, just to get other views. I mean, we're never in a silo, and it's never good to be in a silo when you're making decisions otherwise.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, first of all, mentor protege relationships cannot be forced. I know a lot of companies, they try to set up these mentorship programs and they match people together, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I've found that the best mentors that I've found are the ones that I found myself, basically. People that I've worked with in the past, people that I worked for in the past. I have previous, managers that I count as mentors. I have people that I worked with as peers that I count as mentors. And so those are the folks that I consider my mentors. One of the things that I enjoy doing is being a mentor for others, because I know it's helped me in my career, and it gives me satisfaction to provide that help to others. It's kind of the concept of passing it along, right? And so even though I have no monetary gains from it, it's not like I'm being paid to be a mentor or anything like that. I have personal satisfaction being able to help other people out. And that's one thing that I would encourage other leaders to do, is find people that are early in their career and help mentor them if they're open to being mentored. It'll provide you with a lot of satisfaction in your personal life and your professional life.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the giving back is that. And this is the point to say that when you think about mentorship, it doesn't like have to be like you call somebody and say, "Oh, do you want to be? Can you be my mentor?" or vice versa. I mean, it can be just naturally. Is somebody you just pick up the phone, you meet every once in a while, and you just pick their brains and ask them questions and have interest in what it is that they do. And it's a give and take, it's symbiotic relationship. It's not like, oh, Martin, can you call you up one day out of the blue and say, can you be my mentor? Sometimes you don't even have to say you're a mentor. You just happen to have that relationship that is somebody you can consult with and be your confidant, or somebody you can ask for advice. It doesn't have to have the title, the official label on it, right? It doesn't have to have subtitles when we talk about these relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of times it's a friendship. Like you said, there's no label to it. It's somebody that you know that you can bounce ideas off of. I've done this many times where I've come across a challenge not in my career, but maybe a certain technical challenge that I need to overcome. And I know somebody that is in this area that can provide me with help. I call them up and I say, hey, I can't get into details. We don't have an NDA in place or anything like that, but let me give you kind of a high level of what I'm going through, and let me know what you would do in this situation. And I've never come across a situation where somebody says, no, I'm not willing to help you. People, I think, in general, are willing to help, especially if they know you.
Yeah, and also I would say that we all have busy lives, and I think the digital economy, and we're becoming more ADD than ever before, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be in constant communication. Even if you are having a conversation once in a blue moon on an ongoing basis, I think the consistency is the key, because you don't want to be doing something that, okay, when you need something or you need an advice, or that's the only time you call. You want to have that ongoing relationship, and even if it's sporadic, or but as long as it's has some sort of consistency, whatever that consistency is. Because I think people always say, oh, I don't have time for this, or I didn't call that person for a whole year. What are going to think about if I call them now? And it doesn't matter. We all have things, it's called life, right? Things catch on to us, and sometimes just time passes. But don't be afraid to pick up the phone and have that conversation, and stop texting. Like, text is impersonal. You just pick up the phone. You can have it over Zoom, or even grab a coffee and meet the person. We're very transient, right? So people like travel, so just make an effort, a cognizant effort to actually meet with a person, and again, create that relationship, ongoing relationship over time.
Yep.
I don't know if you can chime into that.
Yeah, no, that's important, is maintaining the relationship. And like you said, not just going to them when you have a problem, but trying to maintain that relationship. Send them, hey, Happy New Year's or Merry Christmas or whatever. It just takes a few seconds to touch base with them every once in a while, and just see how they're doing and all that kind of stuff. Just maintaining that relationship. And there are platforms now that make it easy. I mean, LinkedIn, everybody watching your show should be on LinkedIn, right? Sharing stories, commenting on stories, and all that kind of stuff is important. So that's what I would recommend, is just make sure you stay in touch with your network, because they're there to help you.
Yeah, and absolutely, it's a great LinkedIn and others is a great place to do so, and it's also again you can do a one to many where you can create an update. There's very few people actually on these platforms that they create content. All they do is share or like. It is something to be said about the content being content creator of sorts, and it doesn't have to be long. It can be something that you either wrote or recorded or whatever the case may be. So let me switch topics for a bit and ask you, as you advance your career, how do you keep current in terms of making sure that it's such a fast moving target. Like the knowledge base associated with cybersecurity is so vast, and there are ongoing innovation, ongoing areas, whether it's vulnerabilities, whether it's attack vectors, whether it's methodologies, just systems, solutions, vendors. I mean, there's just so much ongoing on a regular basis. How do you keep current?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, things are much different now than when I was, early on in my career. There's so many more places where you can gain knowledge, everything from YouTube and Cybrary and all kinds of other online courses and online, knowledge providers. Back in the day, we just didn't have that much in terms of, places where we can learn different things online for free, nonetheless. Additionally, now with cloud technology, you can spin up a lab in seconds and get some hands-on experience. I remember back in the day having to order servers on eBay and setting them up in my parents' basement and racking up the electrical bill and stuff like that. So never in history has it been easier to learn things, has knowledge been more available, and have resources been so cheap and abundant to get some hands-on experience with. So there's really no
Martin,
excuse
is
not
that
to
it?
do that.
Well, there's no excuse. One, I completely agree, and you can buy a $35 computer and run a server farm, out of a solar panel today. I mean, it's incredible the amount of technology you can condense. But isn't it a almost like a double-edged sword, where there is so much available, and then you almost like get lost in terms of what should you focus on? Do you know what I mean? Like there's just so much available at no cost, and you get pulled in a different direction. Okay, what should I learn? Should I learn pen testing? Should I learn malware reverse engineering? Should I learn incident response? What it is. There's just so much. So what would you recommend for someone who's trying to figure out how to stay on top of the current innovation, and then like Wayne Gretzky said, you should like skate to where the puck is going to be, know where the puck is.
Yeah, well, first of all, you should be doing what you enjoy doing. That's number one, right? So just because
Love
there's
that.
money in a certain area doesn't mean you necessarily want to be doing that, because ultimately, yeah, you could be making a lot of money, but if you don't enjoy what you're doing, then it's not going to be a great experience. Second of all, there's just so much to learn in cybersecurity. You're not going to learn it all. So you want to get like an exposure to all the things, but then specialize in the areas that, again, you enjoy and the areas that you're good at. So figure out what it is you want to do, what you're good at, and sometimes you won't know until you get started in in different things. Um, the other thing is relying on people to help you in certain areas. So you'll have situations like I talked about earlier where you don't know the answer, but you know who to go to for the answer. I use a company called Sentry Cybersecurity out of Europe. They're out of Kosovo for my pen testing needs, and they help us out, with our pen testing. They know a lot when it comes to application pen testing, infrastructure pen testing. So anytime I have a question around pen testing, I refer to them, and they've never let me down. And it goes that way for other areas as well. If I need experience in digital forensics, like, yeah, I have a certification. I got that a few years ago. A lot's changed since I got that certification. And there's individuals and companies that do it a lot better and specialize in that. So number one, figure out what you want to get into. If you want to be a technologist, if you want to be a subject matter expert, find out what area you want to specialize in and try to do the best you can in gaining as much knowledge and experience in that area. But if you're on the management side like I am, just understand that you're not going to know everything about everything. You're going to have to rely on folks to help you through. And to stay current, like I said, there's a lot of different resources out there, everything from listening to podcasts, which I would recommend. I listen to a lot of podcasts, especially back in the day when I commuted to work. I would have an hour and a half commute each way, and I would just listen, I would grind through podcasts during my commute. And staying on top of the latest technology, there's so many resources online, but you got to put the time and effort in to kind of stay on top of things. So that's what I would say on that topic.
Yeah, it's incredible, and hopefully people would listen to this podcast as well. There's just so much to learn, and as you mentioned, you can double multitask, right? So you are doing something, and then you're using the time that you have, and that's why I always envision people listen to or watching these events, is that you are able to absorb some of that, and a life hack is sometimes to play it at 1.5 speed or 1.2. So you can accelerate and learn at a faster pace as well, if you can make it. So what's your take on continuing education? You specifically has done some high level certifications recently. One of these, the GCLF, the certification for CISO specifically. Maybe if you can expand on that, talk to me about why you decided to continue education, and what value do you see in certification specifically in this particular body?
Yeah, absolutely. So certifications, for me personally, are a great way to test my knowledge. I try to stay current with my certifications. I've done a bunch of them for my SACA. I've done some of the GIAC ones. And for me, it's just a way to challenge myself in, again, staying current and also learning new things, and then testing my knowledge with that exam or whatever the test out is at the end of that certification. The Global CISO Leadership Foundation, I got involved in that, again, to give back to the community. I feel like I have a lot of knowledge in the area of incident response. So I wanted to share some of that experience, some of that knowledge. And so that's why, when Chirag reached out to me, I decided to be involved in that effort. And the other thing that they say, I don't know if you heard this saying, is the best way to learn something is to actually do it, right? So it's one thing to read a book or listen to a podcast, but when you actually are able to teach something to somebody, you actually can demonstrate those skills. So I felt that actually verbalizing and teaching a subject like incident response life cycle helped me develop kind of myself in that area as well.
There is an amazing perception on this. I have to tell you, even from a personal experience, every time you teach it or any topic, you really have to internalize it to a much higher degree. So I highly recommend to anybody who wants to be proficient in topic X is to study first, try to apply it, and then go try to teach it to someone else. Even if it's your family relative, try to explain to them what incident response is, or find somebody else doesn't have, they don't have the knowledge that you have, and they might want to get into the field, and then you can volunteer. I'm sure there's a lot of boot camps, a lot of organizations that require or need volunteers, so you can always apply for that, and it's part of you giving back. And then, as you mentioned, aside from creating that network that's so valuable for you, is the ability to really internalize, specifically internalize the knowledge that you acquired. So what is the global CISO governing body, like the Leadership Foundation? Is it for CISOs by CISOs? Talk to me a bit about what's the kind of the goal, and specifically what was appealing for you as a CISO.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's taking knowledge and experience from current CISOs and applying that to a certification process and a training regimen for aspiring or other CISOs that are currently CISOs. So one of the things that I like about this approach is it actually is based on not just like book knowledge or theory, but actual practical knowledge of current practicing CISOs. So some of the experiences that are shared throughout these modules are experiences that these folks actually had in the real world. And I think that's very valuable, is the actual exposure to real world situations as part of this certification process.
And why is that needed? I thought that the book scenarios always match with the real world, or I guess there's a gap somewhere.
Yeah, it never works out that way in the real world. You know, you can go through a lot of theory in the books and all that, a lot of different scenarios, but the real world is, as you know, very different. So you encounter different scenarios in the real world that you just can't account for in theory. And so those experiences of those CISOs as they're putting their content together is something I think that's very valuable, that other certifications out there don't offer.
Yeah, and as part of that, you also get the chance to rub shoulders with other CISOs and create that open communication and be part of an organization that supports other CISOs. And because it's not enough, I think that, they say it's lonely in the top, because I think once you get to a sort of level, the only other folks they really understand and get it are people at the same level as you are. And so you have to surround yourself with that network, and then it's tough. It's there are thousands of CISOs out there because the economy is large and there's a lot of companies, but it's still to create that connection and be able to be part of an organization that has some merit and value by itself, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And as a CISO, it's a very specific role within the business, right? It's not necessarily a technical role. It really depends on the size of the company, I guess. But as a CISO, you're working very closely with the business. You're working on things like risk management and business planning and strategic planning. And so, again, this is stuff that you can't necessarily learn out of a textbook or at school. I mean, I've gone through academia. I have 2 master's degrees, not that I'm bragging or anything like that, but there's things that I've learned in my role as a security leader that I didn't learn during my MBA. Like, my MBA gave me some good knowledge, some good background, and some good general information, but I would say the majority of the stuff that I work with right now, the majority of my knowledge right now is stuff that I learned while working in my current position.
Listen, as somebody who's done an MBA as well, and doing SWOT analysis and all that stuff for large Fortune 500s, when you come to real life scenarios, as you mentioned, there's some gaps there. So let me ask you this, and then we'll wrap up because I know you got to go. And I really much appreciate the time. We see a lot of incidents in the news, and we've seen a shift in the responsibility of the CISO. I mean, the recent Uber CISO that had to, is probably going to spend some time in jail, and there are just so much associated with protecting the enterprise. Do you see a shift in the roles and responsibilities of the CISO and potentially the attitude of the enterprise as a whole to that role?
Yeah, I do. The thing is, security is everyone's responsibility. So there's this common misconception that, hey, we got a CISO, he's going to take care of our security and we're good to go. And that's just not the case. The CISO role is an advisor to the business. And so as a CISO, you're responsible for helping the business understand their risks, set up a security strategy on how to address those risks and stuff like that. But ultimately, it is a business, it's a business problem that needs to be solved. And you need the buy-in from the board of directors and other senior leaders. And so as an advisor to the business, it's important that the CISO make the business aware of the risks that they have. So everything from, having a risk register in place, creating a risk committee, meeting with senior leadership so they understand, the threats against the company and the vulnerabilities that the company has. And all those decisions should not be made in a silo. It shouldn't be made in a vacuum. It should be made at the company level with other business leaders.
And sometimes you have to have difficult conversations, right? And it's the difficult piece is that you might consider the almost unlimited attack surface on one hand, the limited resources on the other hand, and then potentially the resistance to change of the organization and the leadership that may or may not understand the risks associated with some of the things that you're bringing up. How do you handle difficult conversations if you had to do them? And at what point in time do you say, okay, I'll pick my battles. It's not worth, fighting over.
Yeah. I mean, I like to use the analogy of a road. You have a road, the business is on a road, and they're traveling on this road. You want them to travel in a Ferrari, they want to go fast, but at the same time, you want to make sure that they're safe. You want to make sure that they don't fly off the side of the road, so you put up guardrails so that they stay on the road. You warn them of hazards that are coming up. Maybe you put some speed bumps up in certain areas where there's a hazard, right? You put up signs to show them how fast they should be traveling in certain areas. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the business has to operate, right? And so our job as security leaders is to make them aware of those hazards that are on the road, help put safeguards in place along the road so they don't fly off the side of the cliff, and make sure that they're aware of those hazards, right? And that's kind of the analogy that I always go back to is you don't want to be a blocker as a security team, right? You don't want to be the person that says no. It's better to approach the situation and work with the business on figuring out how they can accomplish their goals in the most secure way possible.
It's an interesting analogy. I love it. And potentially when there's a ransomware, you can say, hey, we just took a pit stop and we're just changing the things and we're fixing whatever needs to be fixed and we're off to back on the road. Is any, from looking back at the career, and this may be like the last question, anything that's memorable to you, like any stories that come to mind, maybe it's success and maybe potentially like, failures that they were very impactful for you during your career path?
Oh boy, I can't.
And I know I put you on the spot, Martin.
Yeah.
So
excuse me. I can't think of any one, one failure. I mean, I've had obviously challenges along the way. I think it's worth mentioning that you want to turn every challenge, every quote unquote failure, into an opportunity to do better and to learn something. And as long as you're learning and growing, I think that's the important part. No one's going to be perfect. No one can make the right decision 100% of the time. But as long as you're learning from your mistakes, I think that's the most important part.
And you keep on growing, right? So you keep on growing in your role and your responsibilities, and both in personal and professional life. I think this is the goal for all of us. And with that said, Martin, I wanted to thank you very much for joining me today. What's the easiest way for people to reach out to you to learn more about the GCLF certification and just in general, just get some feedback or just provide some feedback?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to look me up, Martin Bialczak. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone has or give advice. In terms of the Global CISO Leadership Foundation, they also have a LinkedIn page that I would recommend your viewers go to visit. And I'm not sure, maybe we can add a link into this video somehow so that they can get there in an easier fashion.
Yes,
but
we will.
There's a lot of information on there. They have a website, and they're looking to start the first few classes. So if anyone's interested in signing up for the certification, please reach out to them. There's even a coupon code to save you like 20 or 25%. So make sure you take advantage of that coupon code while you're at it.
Fantastic. And Martin, you're one of the instructors?
I'm actually not one of the instructors. I don't have the capacity right now to take that on. I may be in the future.
Okay.
But this session I won't be instructing. But there are some excellent instructors that are available.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Martin. And much appreciated. I'm looking forward to connecting with you in the future, hopefully in person. It's been a real pleasure, and thank you very much for sharing the story. And for those who joined us today, thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. And in the meantime, stay safe online as well as offline, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.